Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming for this special SME for Labour event and what the labour movement can do to support Ukraine. We're missing, as you can see, one panelist, Gary Smith of GMB. I hope he'll join us. We are, of course, competing with the speech of Rachel Reeves, currently probably in the main hall. So I hope he'll be able to join us as we go along. But even aside from Gary, we have two other wonderful panelists here with tons of foreign policy and development experience. My name is, by the way, Salman Sheikh. I'm the founder and CEO of the Sheikh Group. We work on dialogue and mediation in conflict zones, particularly in the Middle East. I should also, in full disclosure, say that I will soon be putting my hat in the ring to be a prospective Labour candidate for Kensington in London as well. Okay, it's lovely to be here in Liverpool. As a lifelong Liverpool supporter, it really is something special. Okay, Councillor Jessica Toale, of course, who represents Westminster, the winning Westminster. Over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Salman, and thank you everyone for coming to this event today. I actually wear two hats in this conversation. First, as co-chair of Labour Foreign Policy Group, so looking at some of the macro issues around the Ukraine and the conflicts there, and what the Labour Party can do to support and be an advocate. And as Salman said, in my newly elected role as a councillor in Westminster. Now I represent the West End ward, which includes Mayfair. So many of you will know that there is a huge problem with illicit money in the property industry there. And Chatham House recently did a report on kleptocracy in UK economy and property markets. And of the 99 properties that they listed in an annex in this report, 4 were in Mayfair and another 15 were in Westminster. So there's a significant problem within the borough, and it's something I'm going to come back to towards the end of these remarks. But how can the Labour movement support on Ukraine? And I think so far the Labour Party has been on the right track. It was Labour that was calling for deeper and faster sanctions at the outbreak of the conflict, when the Conservatives were clearly compromised by the Russian money that circulates within the party. And they really dragged their feet, calling for things like 18 months for foreign owners of property in the UK to register their interest. And it was Labour calling to expand the number of items on the list of sanctions, to move faster on it, and to bring down the time to register those interests. So we were in a really unusual position in the UK, where you saw European countries seizing super yachts all over the place, and it was on the front pages of our newspapers, and the Conservative government dithering over what they should do. The second area where we have 100% been on the right track is in the humanitarian response. Again, the government has treated the concurrent refugee crises like a bit of an inconvenience. We have a Home Office that criminalises asylum seekers and has tried to turn public opinion against the lawyers who support them, and have created, or at the beginning of the crisis, had created a very bureaucratic and restrictive process for people trying to come to the UK. Instead, it was Yvette Cooper calling for safe, secure, simple and unbureaucratic routes into the UK. And I'm glad now, because of that pressure, we're seeing an uptick and a lot of support and a lot of generosity pouring out of the British people. So what can we do and what must we do? I think on one hand, there's clearly a case that we must work constructively with the government where we can, whether that be on military support, humanitarian support. But of course, that's not uncritical support. We must hold them to account where they are compromised or even being incompetent on the issues that they're dealing with. The second issue is this is a really long-term crisis. It's not going to end anytime soon. It might roll on for years. So we need to move from crisis mode into campaign mode and really get the support of the British public behind us, particularly when we're facing a cost of living crisis here, for the long-term support that Ukraine will need, including thinking about a Marshall Plan for the reconstruction of Ukraine when we do get to a stage where we can start to think about a longer-term future there and the sort of acute end of the military conflict has come to an end. A couple of other things. I think the Labour Party has a responsibility to help support Ukrainians who are trying to document war crimes in eastern Ukraine in particular, but across the whole country. The Russian military is a highly unprofessional outfit, and they have a long track record of committing atrocities in conflicts that they've been in the past. I just look at Afghanistan. The second thing is support for civil society. I think both in Ukraine and the anti-war civil society in Russia as well, finding innovative ways to support those communities and stay safe. From a local level, there are also lots of things that we can do, and I'm really pleased that Adam Hug, the leader of Westminster Council, is here in the room, because local governments are really at the coalface of the response within the UK, and 9 out of 11 of the core cities across the UK are Labour run. So Westminster is currently supporting just over 1,000 Ukrainian refugees with families in the borough. And the supporting extends to homelessness services, getting kids into primary school, and so local authorities are the ones delivering those services right at, as I said, the coalface. But what we've also done in Westminster is launch a Dirty Money campaign, which is targeted at rooting out illicit money and shell companies who are entrenched in the property market in Westminster, as well as other examples of tax evasion and other such practices. And what Adam has proposed in The Guardian, if you read it, is that we explore the use of compulsory purchase orders where there have been really extreme and egregious breaches of things like council tax arrears and the failure to meet transparency requirements. And it's a shame that it is local governments really taking a lead on this, because it was since 2013 I've been working on transparency in our financial systems. David Cameron made anti-corruption a priority in 2016, and we still haven't seen the type of action that we need from governments to really tackle this problem. The last point I want to make is that the Conservatives have started using this line that the cost of living crisis is a result of the conflict in Ukraine. And Labour cannot let them get away with that. Yes, it contributes, but it is 12 years of austerity that has really undermined our economic fundamentals in this crisis, in this country. It is a compound impacts of Brexit, COVID, austerity, and the war in Ukraine, and I don't think we should let them off the hook for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. And of course, I should have said from the start, you're also the founder of the Labour Foreign Policy Group. Gary, welcome. Thank you for joining us. You've already missed, I think, a wonderful, important set of issues that Jessica's raised, including regarding dirty monies, refugee crisis and support to that, the crisis to campaign model, which in terms of a Marshall Plan for Ukraine, as well as things like documenting war crimes, and you heard some of the rest. I'll come to you after David. I'll come to you next. David, of course, heads the Labour campaign for international development. Welcome.
Well, thanks very much. It's great to be here talking about this important topic. And I know that Jonathan, who, when he contacted me about this event, wanted to talk a little bit about some of the reconstruction issues, and Jess has covered a lot of it. I think the obvious thing to say, though, is, of course, we've got to win the war first, and the support that we've given Ukraine has to continue, no matter the difficulties that we face at home, until we have allowed them to liberate the areas that have been taken by Putin's fascist regime. I think the other thing that needs to be said is that there's a lot more destruction to come. And it's not because the Ukrainian forces are badly trained or callous. The nature of urban warfare is that it does mean a lot of destruction rather. So the bill is going to be massive, and we have to be prepared for that. It's going to take a lot of money and resources to rebuild Ukraine when this war is over. Of course, we want to build back better, but what that means is not us imposing things from here. It's about asking Ukrainians what they want and how they want to be supported. And I know that every effort was made to get a representative from Ukraine to this event today. It's then we want to listen to. We want to listen to the Ukrainian trade union movement. We want to listen to Ukrainian civil society. And we want to address some of the structural problems that were in Ukraine before this conflict started. I mean, no one is pretending it was a land of milk and honey. It clearly has some governance issues that need to be looked at. But again, you can look to Ukrainian civil society, their clear idea of what they want to see in terms of more transparency around procurement and how we reconstruct Ukraine. I also do briefly want to talk about the rest of the world. Bear with me. I think there has been a few people saying, well, we're spending so much effort in Ukraine, what about the rest of the world? Why are we spending so much money there when we're not spending money there? We don't support that at all. For us, it's not a choice, it's about both. So yes, we as a Labour campaign for international development are fully supportive of everything that the West is doing now in Ukraine. But we do want to see that approach applied to other parts of the world as well. Like, we have long called for action in Syria, and we do believe that if action had been taken early on, and I know Salman will agree with me on this, that the bombs that Assad and Putin have rained down on Syrian civilians could have been stopped, and that hundreds of thousands of civilians people would still be alive today. Central part of this is about leadership, and that is where Labour does have a key role to play. If you think about the leadership we showed on the global stage when we were last in government, particularly in response to the global financial crisis, 2009 with the London G20 summit, we know how to do this. We know how to galvanise the world community around a global response to crisis. So yes, the sums are massive. Yes, the scale of the challenge is large. But with the right political will, I'm convinced that we can find a comprehensive way to help Ukraine rebuild and ensure that this is the turning point against letting despots and dictators around the world have a free run, which is unfortunately what they have had over the last 12 years at least. So I'm hopeful for the future, but there's a lot of challenges ahead.
That's great. Thank you, David. That's great. Gary, thank you very much for joining us. Of course, you don't really need any introduction. You're the General Secretary of the GMB. All I would say is I'm a very proud member of the GMB, myself as well. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and apologies for being a wee bit late. I was listening to Rachel in the hall. It just took a bit of time to get over. I'm delighted to be asked to make a contribution today, and I will keep my remarks brief. In GMB, I think we're very proud of the role that we've taken and the position that we've taken on Ukraine with other trade unions, including, not exclusively, but including ASLEF and the NUM, in supporting our trade union sisters and brothers in Ukraine. And the Ukrainian trade unionists themselves are playing the key role in telling us about what our response should be. And it is really, really important that we do listen to what workers and trade unions are saying within Ukraine, both during this time of conflict, but very importantly in terms of any post-war settlement as well. Because what we don't want is some neoliberal outpost in Ukraine. We want a society built on fairness and equity and decency, and our commitment to the Ukrainian trade unions during the war and also in any post-war settlement will be absolute. We have organised online meetings with trade unionists for Ukraine. We were due to have one of the Ukrainian trade unionists at our Congress, but visa restrictions stopped that, though I'm delighted that she was here. A representative of the young trade unionists in Ukraine has been at the party conference and addressed the GMB delegation the other night. And we have also provided practical support along with other trade unions by way of money to Ukrainian trade unions. And on this point about money, it is a very, very important one, because it is money that allowed the Putin gangster regime to buy favours, both from the Tory party and their friends in the city of London. The dirty Russian money has corrupted elements of the British establishment, and we should absolutely say this. The oligarchs turned up with billions and essentially said to elements of the British establishment, we're going to help you re-lead downtown Abbey Roof. And we should never forget that, and should continue to call out what has happened with the corruption of the British establishment and large parts of the city of London. I do also want to say that the atrocities that we've seen, the war crimes that we are seeing, we should be very clear that Putin's Russia is a gangster state, it is a fascist state with huge imperial ambitions, and never ever again should we tolerate nonsense from anybody that somehow there is something progressive about the regime in Russia, that there is in any way some lineage back to a more progressive history within Russia. And I hope once and for all that the Putin apologists on the Stalinist left in Britain will be absolutely buried, and with it their lies, disinformation and doublespeak. So, we are unequivocal in our support for the Ukrainian people of Ukraine and Ukrainian trade union sisters and brothers. But I want to bring my remarks to a conclusion by just talking about our motion, which is about Ukraine, but also deals with the important issue of defence manufacturing. Given what has happened within Ukraine, and I don't want to open up the debate on energy, tempting as it is, we need to understand the importance of energy independence, but also our ability to be able to manufacture here in the UK in terms of the defence infrastructure that we need. And I do get a bit confused at times when I see elements of the left saying we support Ukraine, but we wouldn't support investment in defence manufacturing. It is completely counterproductive. How are we going to support the resistance in Ukraine? Are we buying catapults for China, Iran, or who knows where? We need a strong defence manufacturing here in the UK. It's good for jobs, it's good for local economies. 1 in 3 of the population in Barrow and Furness works in that yard. So support the Ukrainian people, support our motion, and support our commitment to defence manufacturing jobs and increase spending on defence. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Gary. That was very, very clear. In fact, all three of you have been very clear. So, in terms of our response, we've already heard a variety of, I think, key points made, whether it's to do with the financial side, whether it's the trade union solidarity, whether it's to do with development, accountability, refugees at the local, national and international level. If I may, as my role as speaker sort of switch to now to speaker rather than chair, I want to address a little bit perhaps the diplomatic aspects based on my own experience. I'm a former UN diplomat. I've also headed a think tank, though nothing to do with Liz Truss, thankfully. And I now head a group which focuses on conflict resolution. I think, as Gary, you said, this war right now on Ukraine is the latest effort by Russia and by Putin to remake the Soviet-Russian empire. We saw it in Georgia, we saw it in Crimea, and we're seeing the same playbook right now. And it's about to get worse, I think, because towards the end of the month, if the Russian Duma ratifies these referenda, he will be escalating further in terms of calling this Russian land. My own experience, as David alluded to, is regarding Syria. For those people who talk about suing for peace right now, let me give you my experience. I've been about a dozen times since 2011 to Moscow, met with very senior officials in the foreign ministry, as well as in their security forces. Every time we were talking about how you could have some sort of a peaceful transition, an end to the military destruction of Syria. The Russians pocketed a lot of that information, but Putin mercilessly pursued the military logic. Even as we were saying, there's no military victory in Syria. Of course, we can't allow that to happen with regards to Ukraine. In fact, in 2013, we in the West blinked when we came to Syria, and in 2015, we pretty much gave up when the Russians intervened directly, militarily. And it's had major consequences in terms of the collapse of the rules-based international order. So, in terms of the labour movement, of course, we have joined this national consensus in terms of arming and supporting Syria. And again, it's very clear what you're saying, Gary, in terms of how weapons manufacture needs to continue, needs to be scaled up if as necessary. And you, Jessica, have also talked about accountability, as is David, in that regard. But let's be clear. We are now entering probably one of the most dangerous periods in international relations, certainly in regards to Europe, since the Cuban Missile Crisis. What Putin is doing by mobilizing 300,000 other Russians is upping the ante. He says he's not bluffing. He has 6,000 nukes. He has 2,000 tactical nuclear warheads as well. And of course, Ukraine is home to about 14 nuclear reactors. So Russia and Putin is pursuing what they have in their military doctrine, which is escalation domination, hoping that we will blink this time as well. He's trying to bring those new recruits to train them and to mobilize them along the 1,000 kilometer long front line that he has right now in Ukraine, and trying to take at least 20% of Ukraine. Our hope is that we do have some time in order to not just slow his advance, but to get him one day to wake up and understand that he's lost. And this is, I think, where we in the labour movement, rather than encouraging us to blink, have to think of how do we realistically sue for peace. And I would say key lies in Russia and Putin losing slowly. What does that mean over the next few months? Putin has to wake up one day and know, to all practical purposes, he has lost this war and that he has to find another way. We have to put forward a strategy of de-escalation and demilitarization, and when it comes to Crimea, perhaps pursue some sort of a special status for the next 10 to 15 years as such. At the same time, there is, if that starts to happen, some scope for lifting economic and individual sanctions while keeping export controls on anything that would aid the Putin war effort going forward. Labour, I think, has a particular role in working with the global south. We must not allow this war to divide us in terms of the global south. There has been quite a lot of talk as I go around places in the Middle East and elsewhere about a certain level of Western contradiction or hypocrisy when it comes to the rules-based order. And what does the global south mean, and who do we engage with? Well, it's with India, it's with African countries, particularly Senegal, which heads the African Union, and it's also the Gulf countries as well. I think it's very, very important. Now, they see Putin is losing. There's an opportunity here for us to find common cause in a strategy of de-escalation and demilitarization. And then, of course, there's China as well, who we must continue to engage with as such. Finally, the labour movement, there's a lot short-term which we can suggest, and it has been said here and pushed for. I've talked about the diplomatic side. Finally, I would say to you is that Labour has to herald a broader, longer vision, a new Labour internationalism, which is akin to what we saw post-1945, where we helped and were critical in the establishment of a fair rules-based international order as such, where we helped in the growth of new institutions and the revitalization of others as well. We have to end the age of impunity when it comes to human rights. And here I come back to Syria, which in my view, very much, in the words of David Miliband, did herald that. And we have to find a new partnership with Europe in that regard, as well as the global south. If we're able to do that, I think the labour movement would have contributed to the new world, which is beyond the barbaric fascist bombing of hospitals and schools that we're seeing now in Ukraine and we saw before in other parts of the world. Thank you very much.